All right, fantastic. It's almost 1 a.m. here, but we have friends joining us over TikTok, YouTube, Facebook. That's how interesting the discussion in the previous episode was. We talk about the movie Gomborza, Pepe Jokton's movies Gomborza. Let's just say right off the bat, it looks like my major disagreements kami ni Leloy kasi for me, as a movie, I think the final scenes were very important. But I explained that a lot of that was also because I was influenced by Nick Joaquin's explanation of last moments of Burgos. I just felt that was important in a sense of, it's a movie after all.
Ay,
But
bro, gusto ko yung last moment si Burgos. Ayoko na pinakita si Rizal.
okay. Sorry. Yes, okay. Then we don't have a disagreement. Okay. Sorry.
Oo.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Oo.
Yes, ako for me, it's more like, wait lang, parang child abuse yan. If like, what are you implying? You won't bring a, what, 7, 8, 9-year-old kid to watch people being garroted. It's a bit too crazy for me. But you're right, also about yung naka-costume sila, magtitinikling na ba sila? I mean, I get what you were saying about that. Sana we just kept it at super, the darkness of it should really shock us
Oh,
in
yes. Oo.
historical consciousness. I really appreciate that. Personally, Cedric is fantastic. I mean, all actors were fantastic. I found the Enchong D one
Oh, wow! Ang
really
galing ni Enchong D. Actually, si
wow.
Enchong D yung pinakamagaling na actor for me doon. Si Enchong.
But again, Cedric was fantastic. I'm just saying, given the role that he was playing, like it brought to life yung nangyari kay Zamora. Kasi kaya nga sabi ko, it speaks to me kasi kakatapos ko lang mag-review at magbasa ng mga libro ni Patricia Evangelista, about EJK, about the weaponization of the legal process. So I think the Zamora example, it just brings to home this fact na how crazy our legal systems can be, that a
Yes.
person who just made a joke about, Bala and Barel in the context of, Sugal, will be just dragged because of affiliation. And let's be honest, that's kind of like the non-laban situation we
Mm.
had under Tigong, di ba?
Yeah.
For me, that was the other thing that was very pulsating about the movie. Yung just the inanity of the judicial process, that especially
Mm.
Zamora's case was really crazy. It was
Mm.
really crazy. Bumalik na rin ulit tayo sa movie, but sige, I think that's a good way of starting this discussion still, yeah.
Ay, di, what do you want to talk about ba? Kasi ako, I wanted to talk about 1872. Ano ba talagang relevance ng year na
Yes.
yon?
80s.
Why are we so focused on 1872? And actually, a good way to think about, I've been pushing this, medyo creative, but to compare 1872 to 1972, these are 2 years of the worst repressions in Philippine history, both 72s. 1872 is the Juez de Cuchillo, wherein the Spanish government tried to practically end the secularization movement of the priests that were considered the most radical at the time. And then, of course, and then yung liberal movement, of course. And then, 1972, this is Marcos trying to crush a kind of what he felt was a conspiracy between the liberals and the communists. And I suspect that in both instances, yung mga movements that were organizing against the government or were critical of the government were driven underground. In 1872, some of them were also driven into exile. But same thing sa 1972, driven into exile. So it's nice to think about those two years in conjunction with each other. Yung 1872 is interesting. Bakit ba ang obsessed ng Spanish government with priests, in particular Creole priests? The very simple answer, and pinakita na to sa Gumbusa ng
Mexico.
konti. Ha?
Well, the presidents of Mexico wasn't the
The presidents of Mexico, 'di ba? In fact, yung mga revolusyonaryo na pari sa Mexico, parang mas radikal sila kaysa sa mga revolusyonaryo sa Pilipinas. These were people who were openly flaunting Spanish laws and were people who were actively advocating for armed revolution and armed rebellion. That would happen much later sa Pilipinas. You would have secular clergy sa Pilipinas na supportive ng Katipunan, and in fact, the reason why many people supported the Katipunan, mga masa, ay dahil yung mga parish priest nila naniniwala sa Katipunan. So eventually, naging ganun din yung proseso sa Pilipinas. Pero nung time na to, what the Spanish government was trying to do is nakita nila yung nangyari sa Mexico, ayaw nila maulit sa Pilipinas. And when they saw Pelaez, when they saw Burgos, ang nakita nila doon ay mga para na-remind sila, naalala nila yung mga Mexican radicals. So they said they wanted to forestall that movement. And it's very interesting, what happens after 1872. Apparently, UST stops, I was just reading about this, stops offering a PhD for priests.
Interest.
In
Kasi
canon law.
PhD in canonic
In
law
canon
yata.
law. Yeah, in canon law. Tinigil nila after 1872. Meaning takot na talaga na magkaroon ng isa pang Burgos. And that's why yung mga intellectuals mo, they're no longer priests. They are now people in exile. So, 'di ba? Tignan mo yung trajectory. Yung mga radical mo, sina Burgos, sina Pelaez, homegrown UST pare. Nung tinigil yon, you couldn't become a homegrown priest intellectual anymore. The way you became a critical intellectual or an ilustrado was mostly nag-abroad ka para kang Rizal. Ganyan. So, yun yung two movements.
So connected. So what are you saying? Because essentially this secular friars were like, well, they were like judicial experts. They were a kind of a lawyer, right? In
Oh,
sense, right? I mean,
tsaka sobrang galing nila dahil and this is what people forget. Magaling ang UST nung panahon na yun, mga kaibigan ko
well,
from UST.
nag-top sila sa bar last year, Number one ulit yung
Hindi.
UST. Just
ang canon law program mo sa UST noon, ilalaban mo yan sa mga canon law program sa Madrid.
sa
So,
Madrid, yeah,
creme
global.
de la creme, ito sina Pelaez at sina Burgos na faculty at saka teacher ng UST. Talagang may K yan. Ang problema mo, yung mga praile na padating sa Pilipinas, mga latak. Bakit mga latak yung mga parating na praile sa Pilipinas? Couple of reasons. Number one, nung binuksan yung Suez Canal, ang dali nang pumunta sa Pilipinas. So, hindi mo na kailangan maging dedicated friar to get to the Philippines. Pangalawa, there were various moments in Spain where magkakaroon ka ng liberal government. Ngayon, kung liberal government ka at kung conservative friar ka, gusto mong takbuhan yung liberal government na yun, pupunta kang Pilipinas. Third reason, yumayaman na ang Pilipinas ng panahon, export wealth. So kung praile ka, medyo mahina ka sa Spain, ayaw mo yung liberal government, gusto mong kumita dahil maraming lupa yung order mo sa Pilipinas, pupunta kang Pilipinas. So what's happening during this period? Yung native priests, people like, and by native I mean Creoles, Indios, Mestizos,
Born in Las Rizal.
pagaling ng pagaling, patalino ng patalino, yung praile na dinadala mo sa Pilipinas, pabobo ng
Nag-ex
pabobo.
sila, nag-ex.
Pabobo ng pabobo. So, and yet, yung praile na pabobo ng pabobo, humihingi ng privileges. So, what does it feel like to be a very smart person being lorded over by idiots? It must piss you off. It must really piss you off. So
And
yun
who had
yun
almost
yun,
the
yun
same
lalit na yun.
blood and features as you, right? Because I found the scene where Jose Borgus was with De La Torre, di ba? Na, "Hoy, De La Torre, open-minded, liberal, etc." But he kept on emphasizing lugar, your place, know your place. Na even the most liberal governor general, supposedly, allegedly, was at the end of the day had this strict notion of hierarchy, which a lot of these friars were subscribing to. But I have one question for you, Lela, and I know we can talk more about this, but one of the, I won't say controversial, but one of the things that stood out for me in this, I mean, obviously Jesuits were behind this production, and I think we have to keep on emphasizing the contribution of these folks to the fruition of this movie, aside from Pepe Jokno and the fantastic team. One of the argument was, di ba yung sinabi ng mga friars, tayong sisisiin nila sa lahat ng nangyaring mali, when in fact, ang idea was, the rot in the apple really is in the secular imperial machinery. That Izquierdo, in a way, was symbolic of this violent lashes of a dying beast, which is this pathetic empire in the late 19th century, barely holding on to Cuba, and now also facing serious problem in the Philippines. How do you see that thesis? Is it an do you see that thesis as an apologia or a kind of a counterpose contra Rizalis,
Well,
obsessive theory?
Well, I think we should really step back din naman. I mean, madaling santuin si Pepe. Pero si Pepe naman talaga galit na galit sa mga praile, 'di ba? And sometimes he was kind of unfair to the friars kasi he thinks in many, like for example sa Morga, sa annotation of Morga, it makes it seem as if many of the friars deleted Philippine culture, which is absolutely not true. In fact, a lot of the friars, they were the ones who preserved the dictionary. So what we know about, ancient Tagalog syllabary, for example, a lot of it comes out of the frailes. Kung walang fraile, wala tayong appreciation ng culture na yon. In fact, as early as the 16th century, kararating pa lang ng mga missionary, marami sa mga dumarating na encomendero sa Pilipinas were kind of caudillo style, expecting to do in the Philippines what they did in Mexico, meaning, kill people and make money out of the new colony. ang mga humaharang doon were the priests and the friars. So for example, in the 16th century, yung Synod of Manila, which explicitly said na kung abusive enkomendero ka, wala kang absolution from the church. Napaka-clear nun sa records. So a lot of that history, in fact, has been deleted by the radicalism of Rizal. Rizal was kind of radical. And as with anything, it's part of it tatanggapin mo, part of it hindi mo tatanggapin. Dapat tanggapin mo na during Rizal's time, abusive naman talaga yung friars, lalo na in places like Calamba. But at the same time, hindi rin naman totoo yung sinasabi ni Rizal na ever since bulok na yung mga friars na yan.
Sila Padre Damaso eternally. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely not true. Like, especially I have a student, for example, who is working on the Dominican on kind of Dominican proto-liberal traditions under the influence of a theologian named Father Suarez, whose brother was actually sent to the Philippines. And in many ways, yung kind of ideas of proto-liberalism that would be absorbed by the Philippine Revolution were coming from these earlier forms of thinking within the friar orders. And you need to recall that the major critique of the violence in Latin America had come from the friars. Kaya nung dumating na sila sa Pilipinas, ready na makipagbangayan yung mga praile against the conquistador, saying, "Ops, you cannot bleed this colony you cannot bleed it dry the way you did Mexico."
I don't know, with Incas and Aztec and all of
Ah,
that. Kaya nga hindi nangyari yung genocidal level of violence that we saw with conquistadors and all.
yes. May violence and actually may declining population, significant decline in population. So it's not true that it was a lot less sanguinary than yung colonization of Latin America, but definitely may diferensya. And one of the differences is because of this kind of intellectual movement within the friars towards a kind of humanism already, and a kind of proto-liberalism, I would say.
Interesting. Pero siguro meron din aspect of, 'di ba? Hindi naman monolithic yung the friars, 'di ba? May mga times na more dominant, may mga times na more liberal, may mga times na more reactionary. Depende din dun sa politika nila back in the Madre.
Yes.
Right? So pag sobrang liberal yung government, especially, I mean, you mentioned this dun sa isang libro mo na isa sa mga favorite kong libro sa Pilipinas, yung Liberalism and Post-Colony, about how the Cadiz Constitution, right? Probably in a way reinforce yung reactionary tendency ibang friars, because it was a huge leap for Spain to go from Spain of the 17th century to, my God, Napoleonic Spain, di ba?
Yes. And then of course talaga nung by the time of the Carlist Wars, nagkakaroon ka na parang similar to the United States ngayon, nagkakaroon ka na talaga ng polarization in Spanish society. And in many ways, the polarization would climax in the Spanish Civil War in the 20th century. And so kung praile ka, you were kind of wala ng choice. It was either you chose the liberals/Republicans or you chose the conservatives who were claiming to protect the church. And that is why, unfortunately, by the 1930s, even a enlightened university like the University of Santo Tomas turned General Franco into their honorary rector, di ba? So yung ganong klaseng polarization where talagang a lot of the friars were funneled into reaction and fascism, actually. But that wasn't always, what I'm saying is that wasn't always the case.
Yun nga, hindi monolithic, which is what you tend to get dun sa Rizal thesis, essentially, na ito yung mga pinakaugat. So for you, hindi masyadong controversial yung sinasabi sa movie na the friars were the scapegoat for the inherent brutality of the imperial regime, reactionary imperialism towards the end of 19th century. In fact, the part where the Bishop of Manila ba yan, na nag-intervene to make sure na they still keep their yes. Is that historically correct?
I think that is historically correct. This drove me back to Schumacher. A lot of us read Schumacher again after the
Sorry,
films.
UP kami. So, our bias is like we rather read like Benedict Anderson and Constant.
Oh, si Ben also never cited Jack Schumacher because he styled himself as a new left radical and would never cite the kind of more conservative Athenians. So, pero bumalik ako kay Schumacher and mukhang totoo yung part na yun.
Yeah. Although, of course, di ba may intervention dun, alam naman, nakikisaw-saw ako parati dun sa back and forth mo. What's the name of that Filipino scholar in Cambridge who did this fantastic dissertation on the role of Vatican during the...
Si Jetro still working on his dissertation.
I went to like, wow.
Magiging exclusive yun pag lumabas.
sobrang ganda nung dissertation niya. I'm so impressed. I mean, obviously I didn't read the whole thing, but from what I gathered was like, wow, I had no idea. Oh nga, no, like the Americans didn't start with, blank slate. They had to deal with the Catholic majority country
Oh,
after
yes, yes,
Spanish.
yes.
They didn't make
Oo, and actually,
political analysis.
sana nga at one point mapunta ni Jethro yung issue ng Lasal. Kasi Lasal, 'di ba pareho tayo may Lasal
Connection.
connection, 'di
Correct,
ba?
correct.
Lasal in many ways was supposed to be the American face of Catholicism sa Pilipinas kasi yung American colonial government yung nagsabi na pumasok yung Lasal brothers dito because they wanted the American Catholics to be able to compete with these more deeply ingrained Hispanicized Catholic schools like Ateneo and UST.
Very good point. Very, very good point. I mean, I had no idea about it. I spent quite some time. Okay. So this was the American Catholicism. Okay.
Oh.
So wow. So you have UST and then Ateneo and then like, oh, wow. That's incredible. I had no idea about it. Now, going back to this, I mean, where I disagree with both of you gentlemen, or at least with the other gentleman, is in fairness, one of the reasons why I got to appreciate Schumacher, and in fact, the reason why I fervently disagree with my fellow UPian on the caution of Rizal as a revolutionary, is because Benedict Anderson, dun sa isang New Left Review argument, yung trilogy na ginawa niya about Rizal, he mentioned that it was the Schumacher letter to Rizal that was decisive, particularly in this letter where he argued about, quote unquote, I mean, more or less preconditions for a successful revolution. Kasi kung
Yes.
bara-bara ka mag-revolution, which is more or less what happened under a certain gentleman, you're just gonna get people killed in vain. So if you want
Yes.
to do a successful revolution, you want to make sure there are at least 4 or 5 conditions met, including, of course, making sure my imperial overstretch, which was coming about as the Cuban independence war became crazy, which Bonifacio knew more about. So essentially, ang parang Rizal was not against revolution. He was against bara-bara, mindless violence, revolt. And second, and I think this is where Benedict Anderson's intervention was helpful to me. I don't know if you agree with that. His idea was that dahil nasa dapitan si Rizal at medyo nasa laabas siya ng, you know what I'm saying, circulation of proper information, siguro hindi siya sobrang updated dun sa gaano ka talagang vulnerable itong Spanish Empire niyan. And in a sense, mas well-informed si Bonifacio based here sa Tondo, Manila, sa kalagayan ng Madre España and how vulnerable they were at that moment. Except he was not successful. It was Aguinaldo who was successful in pushing it to its logical limit. I mean, what do you say about that? Yeah.
Alam mo, lahat ng revolusyonaryo disimulado. So hindi lahat ng hindi naman naaamin lagi ang revolusyonaryo ng full intent nila. This is what we forget. Is it possible, for example, that Burgos was a separatist? Unlikely, but possible. Kasi hindi mo naman alam, kasi hindi ka naman naaamin, papatayin ka kung umamin ka eh. Is it possible that that when Rizal said that he was going to build a colony in Borneo, is it possible that he was doing that in order to build a revolutionary army? Possible. Hindi ka naman naaamin eh. 'Di ba? And if you look at, for example, ang magandang example dito yung 1972, again, yung comparison. Marami sa mga gusto magrevolusyon naman yun, hindi naman papahuling buhay in public. Si Aquino, nakikipag-meeting sa mga komunista, ready mag-armed revolt, nagbibigay ng pera at ng baril sa CPP. Publicly, aminin ba niya yun? Hindi. Aba, nung nahuli siya, inaccuse siya na ginagawa niya yun. Aba, deny ng deny. Di ba? Kasi hindi ka naman papahuling buhay. Lahat ng revolusyonaryo, hindi magpapahuling buhay yan under repressive circumstances. So, when we ask the question, was Burgos revolutionary? We need to take into consideration the fact that a lot of it is shrouded by mystery. And a lot of it, we just can't answer, di ba?
Cloak and dagger. I mean, it's a game of cloak and dagger also. There is, you're revolutionary. I mean, it's essentially Simon, right? That's what he does in filibusterismo. The other side of Rizal, I mean, if you read El Filibusterismo, I think pretty much it's clear that Rizal is for revolution, but for the right conditions. Ayun yung ginawa ni Simon na just out of hatred, just, anarchy style of, a revolt. So that's the reading I
Ito,
have.
going back to Schumacher. Schumacher says that he can kind of date it. By the 1880s, Rizal was a convinced separatist. In other words, he did not believe that the Philippines had a future with Spain. Separatist